All right, so this is the fourth and final content module of the day from me. This is now going all the way up to another level. We started broad by talking about transformation. We then drilled into the ideas about innovation, went to a specific part of the innovation process in the first mile, and we're going to pull way back up and talk about this big, messy field of culture, the myths and realities of building a culture of innovation. Three things that I want to talk about here. First, I want to talk about how you identify whether you've got or are following the behaviors that are consistent with innovation by introducing you to this corporate curiosity quotient. I then want to introduce the fundamental challenge that we see inside scale organizations, which I will call the Pritchard predictability problem. Say that 3 times fast. And finally, I will tell you the answer, which is the short answer is there is no short answer. You have to fight systems with systems. So these are the 3 key points here. Now, if I ask people, did you get your picture table for? There you go, get your picture. If I asked people, what is a culture of innovation? Often people will describe the things that they see. So they'll say a culture of innovation has foosball tables. It's got a great cafeteria, and of course, there's got to be a slide in it. What company is this, do you think? Google. Everyone gets this right. It is amazing. Yes, that is in fact one of the Google offices in Europe. So yes, you might see these things, but these are the artifacts. This isn't what actually makes up a culture of innovation. The way we define it is a culture of innovation is one in which the behaviors that drive innovation success, all the things we've talked about today, they come naturally. They are things that people do without a leader forcing them to do it, without them trying to hit some KPI or KRA. It's just the way that people do their work. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about these behaviors. We spent time today already talking about it, but for points of the discussion this afternoon, I want to simplify it down to a word. I think when you see cultures of innovation, when you feel cultures of innovation, there is one key characteristic that they share, which my 4-year-old, now 5-year-old boy, Harry, exhibits in this picture here. It is curiosity. There is a desire to learn, to test, to experiment, to figure out more things that instantiates itself in a range of different ways. This is what's on the corporate curiosity quotient. We're going to ask you in the exercise in a little bit to calculate your own corporate curiosity quotient. Because what curious organizations do are things like this. They know their customers, not as facts and figures on spreadsheets, but as living, breathing, honest human beings. They take, and this is a term that I stole from somebody who almost destroyed my youth, Nolan Bushnell. He almost destroyed my youth because in 1976, he founded a company called Atari, which led to a lot of time wasted when I was growing up. Whenever Bushnell is trying to figure out a new industry to disrupt, the way he describes his process is taking an idea road trip, leaving the industry behind, going to a trade show in a disconnected industry so he can get that uncommon stimuli to bring back to the thing he's trying to do. This is what curious companies do. They take idea road trips. They bring in outside speakers. They get outside stimuli. They recognize that there's no monopoly on good ideas, so they get great ideas from everywhere. Their teams are diverse. They've got quirky people that you might even call a little bit weird. They've got aliens inside the organization. The curious company creates internal intersections. You're not just working in your silos, you're working with some of these diverse people because that's where the magic happens. They experiment regularly, sometimes with no point other than just to learn. They show, this, by the way, appears in 2 different places inside your material. I see lots of people taking pictures, but take pictures, don't stop. It used to be, in the old days, and this would be 3 or 4 years ago, when people brought out their phones, you'd be terrified because you knew they weren't paying attention. Now you know when you have a slide that people like because they take out their phones. Time change. Show your work. Share ideas early and often. Recognize that every idea is partially right and partially wrong, and the most helpful feedback is the early feedback you get. And the curious company celebrates innovation. Of course, those succeed, but also those that dare to try. That is an intentional phrase here that I will come back to in just a few minutes. I think if you look at this list, and I'll give you again a chance to calculate it for yourself, Most of you who will work at large companies will say, this isn't my company, this isn't what we do. What's the common element between these four pictures here? What exists in each of these pictures? A lump of coal, my boy playing, depending on your country, soccer or football on the field or pitch at a school in Singapore, an idyllic beach sunset with the wind and waves, and a cubicle farm. What exists in each picture here? What's in each picture here? What's in the coal, in the wind, in the waves, in the sun, on the football pitch, inside your company? I heard it from over here, energy. In each of these pictures, there is energy. A plant dies 5 million years ago, is fossilized. We release that energy. Here, in the sun, in the waves, in the water, in the wind. The energy is there. We got to capture it. We got to harness it. We got to amplify it. The energy here is all sorts of misdirected. There's no coach there, but in the right way, beautiful things can happen. And here, I would argue is the world's largest untapped source of energy today inside each of our companies that have the potential to do so much more. Why is that energy contained? There are lots of explanations for it, but the best one comes from this guy here, Mark Pritchard. 2004, Procter & Gamble calls us up. They say, we want your help with innovation. We say, really, you want our help? Because at the time, P&G is firing on all cylinders. A.G. Lafley's in his 5th year as CEO, the stock price is surging, revenues are growing. They launched big category-creating products like Swiffer and White Strips, everything looked good. But as P&G peered into its future, not 5 years ahead, but 30 years ahead, they worried that there were not enough new breakthrough ideas in their pipeline. So we're talking to Mark Pritchard, who's now the head of brand at P&G, about this problem, and this is the way he described it. At P&G, we are organized to deliver consistent, reliable results. This is an operating machine like few the world has ever seen. The dividend at P&G has gone up for 59 straight years, not quarters. Pritchard then finishes the quote, and that is exactly the problem. The dominant gene, the habits inside the organization, everything that you do is wired to make today better. You're perfectly predictable. That's the goal you seek. That is a challenge for curiosity and innovation. Why is that? A couple quick case studies. How many of you use Odeo to discover, create, and subscribe to audio content for your iPod? If anyone raises their hand, I know you're lying because Odeo failed. Apple designed the features that Odeo was working on into its device. The company knew it was going to fail. So its founder said, we need another idea. Asked everyone to break into teams of 2. He said, give me something, anything that could allow us to succeed. A couple engineers, one of which was Jack Dorsey, hacked together an idea where people could post short status messages that would be no longer than 140 characters. You recognize this company? Nobody set out to found Twitter. It was a side project from a company that was going down the drain. Twitter's had its ups and downs for sure, but 300 million users, $10 billion market cap for a company that almost failed. The perfectly predictable company doesn't have side projects. Or this one, UK 92480. This is a very sexily named drug that Pfizer was working on that was intended to lower blood pressure. Unfortunately, the drug didn't work. In most cases, this is the end of the story. When something doesn't work, you shut it down. In this case, however, it turned out there was a side effect that led male patients in particular to come back and ask for more of the drug. Pfizer studied and then optimized the side effect, and yes, the erectile dysfunction category is born. The perfectly predictable company doesn't study side effects. So the key thing that you've got to recognize here is that your organizations are designed to perpetuate today. They're designed to execute current models with predictability, not to discover tomorrow. Well, what do you do about this? This is deeply entrenched within the systems inside your organization. If you are going to fight systems, you need to fight them with systems. That means you have to direct innovation strategically, pursue it rigorously, resource it intensively, monitor it methodically, and nurture it carefully. It's a whole mess of things you need to do. Now, we were talking to a healthcare company about a decade ago, and we were saying these are the things you need to do. They said, oh, that sounds really hard. Isn't there a simpler answer? And there are fads that go through the innovation world. At one point, it was open innovation programs, or maybe it's creating a corporate accelerator or a corporate venture capital fund. Or right now, it's very in vogue to say, let's take a field trip to Silicon Valley. Or maybe let's open an office in Silicon Valley. Or maybe we should binge watch the show Silicon Valley. Those will be the things that allow us to succeed. This company chose something else. It chose Innovation Man. Watch the video.
I am Innovation Man. I am here to get you all fired up about innovation. Are you fired up? I'm fired up. Are you fired up? I'm fired up. I said, are you fired up? Yes. Why are you fired up?
I don't have any idea.
This is obviously a commercial, but based on a true story. So the team hired a creativity consultant. The creativity consultant said the answer is spandex. So if we have all top leaders dress up as innovation superheroes, it will show our organization it's a new day when it comes to innovation. You can predict what happened next, which is nothing. Today, the only thing this company is happy about is this was before the era of ubiquitous camera phones, so there is no photographic evidence that it actually happened, but it did. So what do? You're going to fight systems with systems. I'm going to give you two choices, then we'll have our activity. I'm focusing more on the second choice. The first choice, and I will look at my friend Boogs here from Manila Water, is what Manila Water chose to do. This is described in our 2014 Harvard Business Review article, Build an Innovation Engine in 90 Days. This is to go and create what we called a minimum viable innovation or growth system, where you say, we're going to create a consistent set of systems to go and do new things, but we're going to do it in a scrappy way to get us started. This involves first defining clearly the problem you're trying to solve. In Manila Water's case, this was they wanted to double revenue and increase the portion of revenue that came from non-water related services up to about 50% in a 5 or 6 year period of time. It's setting a strategic direction, picking some of those opportunity areas that have high potential. In the case of Manila Water, one opportunity area was packaged water. Inside Metro Manila, as you probably know, there is a vibrant business where people go and find a good Manila Water tap, run water into a jug, bring it to an ionizer, which does nothing to the water, by the way, and resell it at about 1,000% markup. Because as good as Manila Water is inside its system, what happens in the pipes in your home and office, it can't always control. So Manila Water said, well, we can do that too. Sufficient resources, tapped Boogs and a few of his colleagues on the shoulder. And this wasn't an army of people, this was a handful of people in the early days. And oversee them in a different way. This is a quote from CEO Jerry Ablasa, saying that we formed a separate governance structure so the new programs would be set free from the usual institutional processes, managing investments in new growth more like a venture capitalist than a traditional corporate planner. This was a set of things that got started within a 90-day period. Of course, it takes time to continue to push that forward, but 2 years after this started, about 15 or 20% of Manila Water's net income now comes from new services that didn't exist a few years ago, kickstarted by this contained effort to drive innovation in a different way. The key thing, as noted, is you do have to recognize that your new efforts need to be overseen in a different sort of way. When you're in your core business, you have a set of disciplines you use that work really well. Annual budgets, focus on numbers, punish people who screw up, etc. When you're trying to discover tomorrow's business, there are a set of disciplines, but they're very distinct disciplines. You stage investment because you can't know for sure whether an idea is going to be good. Of course, you look at the numbers, but you listen to the story and you watch the team. You know there will be deviations along the way, and you as a leader, rather than working in a conference room, are out with the team so you can understand firsthand what's going on. It's not less disciplined than traditional corporate planning. It's just a very different set of disciplines. So that's one choice. You go and say, let's create a separate system that can go and drive the new and different. Here's a second choice. You can go and say, we are going to infuse innovation within the organization. Now, to do this, you have to break an addiction that your organization has and every organization has. That is an addiction to business as usual. 80% of CEOs would destroy long-term value in the name of having smooth and predictable short-term earnings. This is what an addict does. An addict does things that he or she knows is bad for them, but they simply cannot help themselves. The guy pictured here, Dr. Robert Smith, is the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, you look at Weight Watchers, you look at what Nolan Bushnell did at Atari, at Candy Crush, at Snapchat, and other things, it teaches you how you break old habits and create new ones. Interestingly, an organization in Singapore, without describing exactly this, has done this and created an entirely different culture within the company. This is a quote from the organization's CEO. This is a huge challenge in Singapore. Singapore is the home of process excellence. There's a huge fear of failure. Managers have got to go and address this. So this leader has led an effort to completely transform the culture, not of 10 people, but of 20,000 people. Can anyone guess from the picture here what company this is? Vince, I told you what it is, so don't nod your head. What industry does it look like we're in? Advertising is something that I sometimes hear. You got some guy in a wizard hat? In here, you are inside the hallowed halls of the former Development Bank of Singapore, otherwise known as DBS. So you're in the most conservative industry in the most process-focused country in the world. And this is a company that has now infused curiosity and innovation and experimentation in its core. And it's done it, interestingly, in the same way that Alcoholics Anonymous breaks addictions that people have. So this is the last framework that I will give you. I know I've given you a lot that talks about how you break habits or create new ones. Our world is complex. You've got to start by simplifying it. Alcoholics Anonymous says 1 day at a time. Piyush Gupta, the CEO of DBS, says 1,000 experiments. You've got taglines. You've got mantras. You've got shortcuts that you might put in your organization. If you participate in the Adobe Kickbox program, U.S. software company, you get a box that has lots of tips and checklists and tricks about innovation. Even more critically, you get a prepaid debit card with $1,000 US on it that you can spend without asking for anybody's approval. It's an easy way to fly a kite without needing to get backing to do it. So you simplify the task. You shape the environment to nudge and encourage the new behavior. Alcoholics Anonymous says, get rid of all the booze that's in your house. Don't go to bars where there's alcohol in front of you. Put yourself in a context where this isn't a problem. In the case of DBS, they opened up their offices, so they created places where chance occurrences would happen. They created accessible tools, things that people could pick up and go and experiment with. You also can consider visual reminders. Amazon.com has a mission of being the world's most consumer-centric company. Every meeting they have has one empty seat in it to remind people that the most important person, the consumer, isn't in the room. You then support the people who are doing the task. Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a sponsor that helps you. In the case of DBS, they formed an innovation team whose job was to not innovate. Rather, the innovation team was acting as a catalyst to help make sure that people got the help they needed. You can create mechanisms to get fast feedback, too. One of the most powerful elements within Pixar, Disney's legendary animation arm, is whenever they work on a new movie, they create something called the brain trust. This isn't something that looks at the final movie. This is something when the director first has his or her vision, the brain trust meets, and all along the way, they've got a very simple, fast way to give feedback. Now, you might not get Andrew Stanton and people like that on your brain trust, but you can create mechanisms where people can very quickly get reactions to ideas. Finally, we are social creatures. You want to form new habits or break old ones, you socialize it. Alcoholics Anonymous, Weight Watchers, the key component is the group. My Fitbit, one of the reasons why I wear this thing religiously is I've got 23 Insight people that also wear theirs. And every week we're taunting each other about how many steps we're taking or not. You want to think about ways to create those connections. DBS, the picture that I showed you, the person in the wizard hat, was a new way that DBS is doing training. Those were some of the very top people in DBS that were going through a 2-day hackathon where they left their old job behind and they had 2 days to come up with an app. This is very countercultural to ask very senior people to actually do something, get their hands dirty and experience creation. And the point wasn't to actually build commercially viable apps. The point was to teach them and have them work together and have a new experience set form. Or, you come back to what I said a few minutes ago, you can create prizes. This is my absolute favorite one. The prize here is called Dare to Try. This prize is given out by Tata Sons, the largest conglomerate in India. As the name connotes, the prize is given out to somebody or to a team that tried something that did not work, but learned something during the process. This is a hugely prestigious thing. The last prize they gave out was in 2015. More than 300 teams applied for it. The key thing from all of this is there isn't a quick fix, there isn't a single answer. Remember, the short answer to all of this is there is no short answer. If you're trying to encourage a culture of innovation, at the very least, remember, anything you do needs to connect to something else. There has to be two sides to it. So if you say we need a lot more ideas, then you better have a mechanism to process them. Don't create an idea box that no one will ever look at. You want great answers, then tell people the problems that are worth solving. You tell people you need to experiment a lot more, you better give them a laboratory with tools to do that. You want people to take risks. There has to be a way to tolerate some of the failures that comes along with it. You say we want disruption, fine, but make sure you've got separate resources to do it. You want big impact, great, but you have to put A-level talent against it. You need to have the innovation pigs that Vince talked about before, or you will never get substantial impact. So this is a complicated set of material, but the basic idea here is if you want a culture of innovation, drive curiosity. What you're fighting against is all the habits and practices at scale are about predictability. So either isolate it with a minimum viable system, like Boogs and team did at Manila Water, or do what Piyush Gupta and team did at DBS and encourage the day-to-day habit of innovation. So my last activity of the day, this will start with an individual activity. I would like you to calculate your own curiosity quotient. So I've got here 8 different things that describe what a curious organization does, and I'd ask you for each of them to circle when was the last time you did this? And be honest. Have you never done it before in the last 1 to 6 months, in the last 1 to 4 weeks, or within the last week? There's a pretty simple scoring system that allows you to come up with an overall score. So first, calculate your own curiosity quotient, then talk about it at your table, and if you've got time, design what I've called here a dual-sided hack. What does that mean? A hack means a creative way to solve something. Dual-sided means you're not just doing one thing, you're thinking about the other thing you need to do for it to stick. So if you say we want to have a contest to encourage people to fail, we're also making sure that our KPIs allow us to do something like that.